So I missed a few shows when I ranked every Netflix animated original, like 20, which is technically a fifth, and oops. Okay, that's a lie. I only missed 5 that fit the criteria I established originally. 6 barely didn't make it into the video because I was too lazy to really watch them. 6 were too recent to make it in time or hadn't released, and one of them got their age rating changed literally a few days after I finished the video. Regardless, I guess all the people telling me that Ninjago was based on a show rather than a film deserve their justice, and I put myself to watch another 200 hours of Netflix animation, and at this point, I don't even know why. This is a call for help. I am being held hostage by myself. Oh yeah, this time I'll do it worst to best, and I will show you the original rankings alongside it so you don't have to kick drop yourself. I did a funny silly in the original video where I told people to piece it themselves simply so they would pay more attention and watch more of the video, but I don't think it's fair of me to ask you to remember 7 months later, so yeah. Also, if you haven't watched the original, I'm pretty sure you'll be fine with this one. You'll at most notice some ratings change if you watch that after, but I do recommend you watch that before this one, simply because I'm gonna make references to it. By the way, Edit Nate will keep track of how many times I say character wrong with you, so hooray! What's left to say? Leave a like so I didn't spend 2,000 hours of my life in vain?
Oh shit, it's the Bible!
When I started writing this sequel part, I figured there just wouldn't be anything so bad to land itself on F tier, because landing here requires a special type of bad. A bad so fundamental that aches me inside and makes me wonder why, and certainly this is one of the lesser examples of that. I'm simply looking at my own rankings now that I'm not as emotional towards it, so maybe some of these extra shows are a little bit more objectively placed. That is to say, I figured this show was so objectively awful that it rivaled some shows that subjectively destroyed my spirit, and by that I mean they momentarily turned me into a ghost. And now I'm spooky again, so let's talk about number 96, Bionicle. You'll notice with this one and the next entry that if there's anything I can tolerate is blatant lack of personality and an over-reliance on tropes. But what if, on top of all that, you decided the show will have to run on a grand total of 5 episodes, starting with an episode that's basically a guy lore dumping about a toy line's world building as a very blatant attempt at advertising using techniques popularized during the early 90s and never else. It's a show about robots who are selected as a chosen one of each nation based on an element, who put on masks that give them powers, and then they need to develop their relationship with a marketable animal companion who are way stronger for no reason whatsoever. Then you watch for the 4 episodes they actually show up in, as you realize that there's no way in hell that they can establish anything about any of the 8 characters in the allotted time. What do they like? Who are they inspired by? What's their backstory? Why are they chosen? Do they have families, friends? What about the relationship with each other? Okay, presume that you know the time you have is a grand total of 80 minutes. That's enough for most films to establish something and get somewhere with it, albeit not spectacularly. So why does this show flop so awfully? Well, because they pretend that every episode is as if the show not only will have more episodes, but like you're watching the middle of a TV season. A decision so baffling that I had to pause the episode and go stuff ice cream into my mouth at 2 a.m. in an attempt to comprehend. And a desperate attempt at that, they really pretend that the first garbage 12-minute episode is enough to really get the plot, but all it really transmits is, oh, there's tropes. Each nation has an element and each power is based on the elements, but a very bad guy wants to destroy the world and our heroes must save us, so they go and actually save us. And now you get to see that exact same thing happened again, but now they speak. It literally feels like you read a recap and started reading the book in page 100 because you just decided the first 99 pages smelled bad or something. That's just how book smells. I know Kindle's the big thing now, but have you ever entered a library in your life? You must have, right? The characters are also incredibly contrived when they do show personality. Like, the brown earth guy literally makes the plot of the entire show by deciding not to get along with his animal partner for no discernible reason. And then the other 8 characters are more than willing to trust him even after they have spent several minutes of an episode telling the guy that his attitude can literally result in the end of the world. That's part of episodes that try to establish traits around them by showing their fighting style or personality, but it's really just a showcase of cool action moves that pretend to tell something beyond, "Look child, this product is really cool, you should buy it!" I guess I can commend one thing about the show, and it's the visuals. They attempted to do something cool with the robot designs, which are one of the few things about the show that works, and granted it's not even part of the show. They gave the characters these very defined outlines that make the different parts of the robot stand out in the convoluted designs, but it literally feels like an animation test thrown together in a few days and it just happened to work out. It's a really weird and peculiar show in that sense. It truly feels like a singular indie animator's work that they put on their portfolio while job hunting, and I think that description truly gets a close how blatant and lame the show is, which which stands out aggressively amidst the desperate attempt to showcase something that's basically the exact opposite. No one's gonna want to buy your product from this. This show's an absolute disaster and thus deserving of its F tier. Reason for original disqualification based on a LEGO franchise from 2001 that had moderate success. No favorite character or episode since it feels like trying to remember a dream at times when I talk about this show. Just know it's a stinky stinker and it's rushed and it passes by quickly. And I don't like it. I hate it. I hate it.
I hate
Pink fluffy unicorns dancing on rainbows.
Oh, you thought we were going higher. Oh, no. We're still in the schlop era. At 89, that's lower than the total amount of shows I reviewed originally. So, Unicorn Academy is the most generic show maybe ever? It's about girls who are secretly selected to go to a secret academy where they learn magic and unicorn riding. But oh no, an evil sorceress hates magic and wants to kill the protagonist because her parent was the most important mage in history, I guess. And if you think that sounds generic, you wouldn't even be prepared. Even the characters' dynamics are boring and derivative, such as teacher who hates misconduct, even if the misconduct literally fucking saved the entire school and world in the first episode! The main girl group is a typical Mary Sue protagonist, cheery best friend, nerd girl, rival girl, athletic girl, and guy who sometimes shows up for some reason. Look no further than the character designs. They are evidently made with the purpose of selling the attached doll line, but even their similar shows like Monster High and Bratz still have their personality and style, while this one just appeals as hard as possible to the young girl demographic without an ounce of creativity. They have magic customized uniforms. Need I say more? The animation is pretty mediocre, all things considered. It really stands out to me when the unicorns go into their trot animation and you can visibly notice when they go into the pre-made keyframes as to not animate everything each time. I mean, it's kind of fair, but still, you can tell there's no love to any fact of this production. No one actually cares, from the writers to the designers, so the result is very much lackluster and unappealing to anyone who isn't or doesn't have a little girl. It's aggressively made for them and you won't get any enjoyment if you aren't them. Also, the plot will literally bend to check off a checklist of things they wanted to do. Like, the protagonist gets in trouble for the most minor things, but they also never want to lose that feel-good shine, so it never feels like anyone is in actual danger. I'll keep myself away from it, but I'm sure there's definitely people who will enjoy how unapologetic it is. Like, I genuinely see little girls going like, wow, this is the most awesome and amazing girly thing ever, and it's perfect, and it's beautiful, and no better show has or will ever be created, until they actually watch something better, and then they'll go like, I was young, it's fair. Favorite character? I don't know, the left yellow streak on Valentina's hair. Reason for original disqualification, released in 2023. No favorite episode because I really just couldn't be bothered to remember. It was a daze, I watched it in the background, I was playing Dark Souls. We'll come back to the Dark Souls thing later. I just finished writing the script and I realized that like half of this segment started with me mentioning that when I started making the second video something happened. And I'm not gonna change it, I'm just gonna be repetitive, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, when I started making this second video, I thought I'd just get more of the same stuff but in a different show. Netflix's catalog has a range over the expected quality of animated shows, but the crux of the critiques tend to be very similar, such as the show feeling rushed, or shows that feel pretentious in their approach towards being appealing. Captain Fall is a little different in the sense that you can't come in and tell me the show didn't have 7 or 8 times the potential it actually displays. I'm pretty sure I said some other show didn't reach its potential in the first video, but this case is different because it feels like they went out of their way to not make this show live to its potential. It framed this idea of adult animated show as an ideal to follow in its mind without realizing the show has none of the appeal other shows with that ideal do, so the result is unique, so to say. And not in a good way, hence why it's still at 87%, still under 83, come on. So, synopsis. The show is about Jonathan Fall, an absolute failure of a man that has gotten nowhere in life even though the pure nepotism advantage that his parents could give him, given that they come from a long aristocrat line of renowned boat captains. As it turns out, his high status but aloof incompetent demeanor and recent unemployment make him the best candidate for this criminal organization. Uses the appearance of a cruise ship to commit high criminal activity such as black market trading and contraband manipulation. Noting how Fall is so ignorant and stupid that he'll never realize the events happening right under his nose. That concept alone is actually really interesting because there's several venues in which the story could go that are really cool. The second in command in this organization right under the boss is Lisa Barrel, and she's radiating of this John Wick energy when she can literally do anything criminal if she actually wishes to. She's badass and ruthless, she's a determined monster, and she's pretending to be Jonathan's girlfriend in order to manipulate him even better. As a consequence, she ends up learning that his messy personality developed in part due to the environment he grew up in. Now, a good writer would figure that this framing is the perfect catalyst to grab Jonathan Fall, who I reiterate is a man-child, and thrust him into a dangerous environment far beyond his capabilities where people at the very least pretend to like him. They notice his positive skills and character depth, which even for this terrible show are actually pretty interesting, which ultimately would lead to Jonathan being forced to develop the skills necessary to deal at least a little with the situation. This would achieve an awesome character arc. Even if Jonathan never actually became competent, the man simply stepping up to the occasion would be satisfying as heck, even if he still was an ignorant twat. Developing the balls but still lacking the brain, or I mean, there's a million paths to take his character to deliver at least a fun show. But no, a bad writer, which is what this show has to work with, would dedicate 11 minutes of a 22-minute episode to showing off one of the victims of the crimes fall directly into a trap, setting up an entire backstory that tries desperately to be funny or irreverent, as Netflix would say, with the only payoff being that they did fall into the trap, and here's when I wish I had a more substantial end, but there's literally nothing here. Nothing comes of all of this. Oh, but there is a character arc. One of the times, False's personality makes two long-standing rival organizations make up because he's too pure to understand the issue and gets them drunk enough to open up to each other. This is the best episode of the show, but also after one of the worst episodes where we see a supposedly important detective that mostly locks into his discoveries, go on a mission at a zoo, and ultimately gets his entire squad and the mayor, who was there for some reason, mauled to death. It's not a funny episode, it's not even a fun episode, you just see uninteresting things happen in a predictable order, and to me, that is such a shame. The setup here and the scenarios are all great. It's fun to see how the criminal organization gets away with most of their crimes through the stupidity and negligence of the systems that are supposed to stop them. Lisa is the only character that actually goes out of her way to do anything interesting plot-wise, while also going on False more positive traits. Yet she's still the only one who has somewhat of an arc, which makes the rest of the characters feel boring and uninteresting. There's this guy called Nico. I didn't even talk about him, because he's an accent, and that's the entire character. The story gives many opportunities where actual stakes could become involved, but usually writers write them off by the end of the episode, with the only exception being the obligatory cliffhanger that so many Netflix writers shove into their stories in an attempt to gather enough demand for a second season, in which they could write that cliffhanger off during the first 5 minutes of the first episode there. Similarly, the show has many moments that feel like great starting points to develop to fall into an interesting direction, but he never even suspects anything is wrong because the writers aren't interested in taking him anywhere. This show is very similar to its main protagonist. It could be so much more in the right hands, but someone along the way just doesn't want it to happen, whether that's from a piece of disdain or just simply incompetence. The show is now cancelled at a half run, and I don't want a second season. The first one is boring, along with half of the runtime being dedicated to extra characters and generic plot lines, while the other half takes all of the moving parts nowhere. Favorite character, Lisa. Favorite episode, cultural exchange. Reason for original disqualification, released in 2023.
Cuando duermo en una litera, yo duermo abajo y arriba España.
I'm not covering anime in this video, though a bunch of you that are in theory Netflix originals, I decided against it. So you may wonder what this is doing here, until I tell you that this isn't actually anime, it's animación española para una audiencia adolescente. So yeah, this show is from Spain and it simply copies the anime art style. One of the things that makes me happiest about it is how it radiates this energy of being created by an extremely talented 16-year-old who decided to write her first webcomic. Not that the original author is just catalyzing that energy as she wrote the novel which inspires this animated show when she was 26 years old. The story follows Jack, whose name once again radiates that 16-year-old named the main character after her crush energy, who arrives home one day to find his parents have been murdered by a magical assassin named Kurtash, his life being saved by two wizards named Victoria and Alsan that explain that he has magical fire powers from the fantasy land of Idhun. And it all goes as you'd expect. He trains at a magically protected location, becomes stronger, learns how important he is for the history of Idhun, and attempts to help her assistant fight back for the control of the fantasy location. There's romance involving Victoria, who falls in love with Kirtash after he decides to abandon assassin work to make a music career through which he controls people by putting hypnosis in the music, noting a particular love song dedicated to Victoria, with whom he interacted like 7 times and tried killing her in 5 of those times. Pretty standard young adult novel stuff. This guy kills the protagonist's parents and the man gets over it in like 4 episodes, but it also allows his crush to have a crush on the bad guy because apparently she can fix him. It appears cute, but it's kind of toxic. I mean, most of the characters feel kind of half-assed, as does the plot, and I believe that's why it comes off the way I said. Nothing has the depth of serious writing because it can make up its mind between a rich and complex plot exploring a depth of issues or a simple fantasy that young readers can understand. It mostly doesn't work, but it isn't horrible or anything. The animation isn't particularly good. You can tell they are trying to copy the style, but they don't really have this substance down. It's easy to tell it's an imitation, and in one way it feels pretty cheap, but I wouldn't call it a failure or bad. It's simply a noticeable unusual choice. I watched this in original Spanish, and usually Spain voice acting isn't particularly great, but this show stands out as being particularly bad in the sense that some people are doing documentary voice while others are trying to be more animated. There's a disconnect to that which occasionally takes you out of the experience. But hey, at least I didn't suffer through any of it unlike the shows that I've mentioned before in this video, so that's a win in my book, which is a very thin book because I never win. TLDR, it's fine and has a pretty strong amateur vibe. Favorite character, Victoria's Grandma. Favorite episode, Ven Conmigo. Reason for original disqualification, the show looks like an anime, so I never figured it was not while making the first video, and it looks completely uninteresting for me to have ever clicked it casually outside of the video. I learned about it from a single comment in the original that mentioned I missed it, so big thanks to Jellybean YT for bringing it up. I'm sure I would have missed it even here as well if it wasn't for you.
I'm gonna say the N-word!
No, stop.
So, Netflix hasn't released a lot of new stuff in 2024. They are releasing the entirety of Dragon Prince, which is actually getting better, but I'd hardly call that new. There's the Exploding Kittens show that came out somewhat recently, but we're gonna talk about that one later. Then, while I make this video, a new show called Twilight of the Gods, directed by Zack Snyder, is going to come out, so that's gonna be fun. And after this video, we'll have the Lara Croft show too, which I'm not gonna talk about it because this video is gonna release before it. And that's about it for Netflix's 2024. I would have taken this last year, thank you. Well, okay. They put out Good Times, which is an adult animated family sitcom fused with off-the-rails paranormal developments akin to those in regular show. It's a reboot from the original 1970s show that nobody wanted a sequel for, and we follow the Evans family, a black couple and their 3 children, as they live in a public housing apartment at a poor neighbor. On the one hand, I like all the jokes they make about the characters being poor. It's not unfunny in the sense that they poke a lot of fun at the circumstances surrounding their economic status, but on the other hand, it's a little disingenuous. Like, someone really wanted you to not feel bad about them and so went out of their way to basically gaslight you into thinking there's advantages to being poor, which heck no. And that sort of logic is followed by much of the show. I love how it will grab a mundane situation and turn it surreal, but I hate how much of its surrealism feels like an afterthought that barely comes into play. What I do enjoy about this show without any buts is how unapologetic it is. At no point will it pretend its metaphor isn't on the nose, like by having a gangster baby that shoots other gangster babies and his side bitch is a nanny. Nor will it keep itself from exploring the dark comedy avenue they wish to explore. It's sort of refreshing in a way, but it also means it uses stereotypes as the base for much of that comedy, something I see people not really getting into, but it certainly ridicules those stereotypes while also portraying a pretty strange picture of the people it uses the stereotypes from. A strange picture that I dare to say isn't the best, and I'm sure that it isn't accurate, but I quite enjoy how it's using the inaccuracy of the stereotypes as part of its commentary. They say, hey, Black Jesus is literal, and it's not funny, but in the show's context, it is used to communicate the point they seem to try to make, where these stereotypes are exaggerations and shouldn't be taken seriously. But the fact remains that you need that layer of interpretation. The show uses a lot of literalizations as a form of critique or commentary. The system is a literal character in this, and there's a ton of stuff like that to the point that it's hard to tell if they intended a serious interpretation from the audience. Still, I believe its commentary isn't the worst, and I found myself thinking the show had moments of brilliance with its portrayal, particularly the social commentary. For example, it has a vagina episode. The characters shrink and go inside a vagina. This is a trope that Netflix loves doing, and I don't know why, but other shows that have done it, say Tuca and Birdie, had something to say about a specific issue. This one instead generalizes it to womanhood, and though the message of the episode is strong and a positive one that attempts to empower women, it can't stop itself from also including elements of stereotypes surrounding gender. It may intend something, but it muddles its own points when you can't tell which stereotypes they want to showcase positively and which they want to showcase badly. They simultaneously use and make fun of blaxploitation, giving a very mixed message. The animation is rough. It can totally work, as you can tell from the show's intro, but the actual show looks choppy and cheap, skipping frames, showing off their stiff-ass rigs, and attempting to stylize the show to moderate success. My favorite thing is this stupid top-down angle of the house they keep doing. They use it constantly but have no top-down angle of the characters, so the result looks like a shitty Flash game. And I'm not joking when I say they are obsessed with this angle for some reason, even though it looks awful. I've seen better animation on YouTube in the past week. There's also an episode where they like kill Elon Musk. That one's pretty stupid. Favorite character? Beverly. Favorite episode? The Big Sister is watching. This episode is actually great to look at. Look at this art. It's genuinely great. Reason for original disqualification? It didn't exist. before.
I flew all the way to Kentucky to get some of your fried chicken, and the Colonel isn't even working today?
I'll be honest, I started playing Dark Souls 1 while I watched this because it had no plot, and even though the episodes on average were pretty enjoyable, my mind was kinda half on beating these stupid bell gargoyles. Archibald is one of 4 brothers that each fit into a trade, such as the one who is in, the smart one, and the one who touches grass and doesn't use Twitter. Archibald, on the other hand, is the silly one, and he does silly stuff, but he gets along with everyone. It's a pretty simple base, but I quite like how it builds a personality from the animation, simple but fun character design, and overall writing style, with the biggest problem being the lack of plot that makes it hard to really watch the show with any motivation. The comedy didn't get me laughing as often as I would like, but it's not painful. I think both kids and parents will be able to enjoy the comedy since it doesn't really rely on relatable humor. The characters sort of exist in this void of ages, so they can imagine Archibald being, say, 10 to 20 years, and that makes it sound like it would be extremely weird, but the execution spends no time on it. It just happens, and thus it gets you used to it relatively fast. And that's literally all I can say about it. I don't have any negatives that apply to the show, though there's certainly episodes that are more fun than others. There's a few that just had me almost ignoring the show as they did nothing interesting and almost didn't stand out. But that's totally a per episode basis and not a general thing. From a character, the narrator, Archibald can hear her, so I wonder if his smart sister thinks he has like undiagnosed schizophrenia and also somehow clairvoyance. Favorite episode, corneal problem, reason for original disqualification. Netflix changed its age rating from TVY7 shortly after the original was made.
Now I've got it. Means hot.
Somehow I almost forgot about this show even though I mentioned it in the very video you hopefully come from, because holy hell this show is buried by Netflix, but probably due to tax shenanigans as always. If you looked at the title, you probably didn't realize the show is actually called Edgar Rises Burroughs Tarzan and Jane, because Tarzan and Jane is already a direct-to-DVD Disney sequel, which means they have the copyright unless you specifically say you refer to the public domain Tarzan King of the Apes by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And now I'm suddenly hit with the realization that I really want sushi, because my mind works wonders. In this show, Tarzan isn't just a monkey boy. He also has superpowers of different animals. He lives in a village, gets bestowed upon his mother, knows English, is the child of a millionaire entrepreneur, starts living in England, goes to school, knows mannerisms and social cues, and the list of stuff that makes him not Tarzan goes on and on and on like that one Wilco song I got into the other day. Instead of just living in the jungle, he decides to go to London and fancies taking down a wildlife trafficking ring with a random girl called Jane, who is there to help, and I guess she can somehow keep up with the Wolverine here. It's very ridiculous. It's a far way off from the real Tarzan. It looks like crap in terms of animation, particularly in places that are in London. Look at my own videos. I've topped this graphical quality. The models are primitive, the rigs look strange, the textures are taken directly out of a PS2 game and are so low resolution. Rooftop scenes revealed PNG buildings in the backdrop, and they have 2 whole ground models that look like Team Fortress 2 characters, which they enjoy spamming a lot, by the way. Was it really that hard to give the L here a speedo and be like, look, new grunt just dropped, different grunt? And yet, none of those problems beat the fact that Tarzan is barefoot all the time and boasting about it. Let's see if he's still happy about that when he steps on a heroin needle, or worse yet, some leftover British breakfast beans. But despite all that, the show is fun. It's not bad, it's fun bad. I found myself a lot less bored at it than I expected, and it's very easy to laugh at its many amateur issues. The fact remains they created a better product and teams with larger productions and budgets, which is kind of impressive even if it's not 100% intentional. It's very similar to many other kids shows, down to the secret main antagonist that is obviously who you'd expect them to be, but it's also a very fun oddity that takes Tarzan on a strange direction you may find enjoyable, even if that enjoyment is screaming at the screen because they have let freaking panthers loose in the middle of London, and apparently this is a good deed? Those are... what? Kinda wish Tarzan beat up at least one wildlife in this because he doesn't do that, and even Disney had the balls to make him square up with a tiger. For the record, the Kong show is still like 20 spots higher because that show has better antagonists and fun characters, whereas this one has like 5 British people, 2 African people, and Tarzan. I only watched season 1. Favorite character? Grunts who carry a gun but can't contractually shoot it. Favorite episode? Chasing the Mastermind. Reason for original disqualification? Nest!
Stop. I'm trying to get footage for this, because the entire thing's on YouTube, right? I'm looking at this, trying to get these stupid buildings. Look at this description. A celebrity, what? This is a kid show. A celebrity. Here, Tarzan's reaction says it all.
My love for you is like a truck. Berserker.
If I had $1 for every time I thought I'd be speaking about Dinotrux on this YouTube channel, I'm actually have more money than my running this YouTube channel, which, yeah, I'm gonna have to get a real job in 4 months and I've cried many nights over it. Dinotrux is rated Y7 for the simple reason that they actually hold absolutely no shame in blurting out building machinery part names in whole. It's all fun and games that one of the Dinotrux will die if they don't find a pneumatic suspension stability spring. And that kind of made me realize this show is an aim at the audience it appears to, as it does try to take itself moderately and somewhat hilariously seriously. They actually pretend like this is a habitat and world filled with fusions of dinosaurs and trucks. A blatant concept that is completely silly because half of the nature of dinosaurs is based on biology, which these creatures clearly don't have. But they'll still unapologetically portray a dinosaur's garbage compaction chamber as its stomach in a way that it's sorta endearing and clever. It's dinosaurs and trucks, and they put them together for God's sake. The only way to do it right is to go all out, and so they did. Also, I can't believe I'm saying this, but the show somewhat has actual continuity. It's serialized, and although it's very soft serialization where they kinda want kids to still have the option to just watch any episode, I was pleasantly surprised with the genuine attempt to combine both writing approaches, and to actual success as well. The extra plot revolves around this T-Rex that doesn't want to be a destruction bot. Since in this world they translated the construction bots to be herbivore species and the destruction ones to be carnivore species. The T-Rex now must gather a theme of other Dinotrux and Reptiles, which are self-explanatory by name. They basically start building a little community, which they do as the show goes on, and it has a very satisfying progression because of this, as you see the robots slowly learn more abilities and develop spaces that allow them to live more comfortably. It's a show that focuses a lot on the problem solving, where adults are never going to be surprised by these solutions, but you'll still notice how they could easily get younger minds thinking, which is unusual considering that many kids shows aren't this subtle about their approach to education. It's practically seamless here. Characters don't have human problems generally, another aspect I enjoy. They can easily be busted up or have some sort of problem regarding their shape, which makes them feel very homogeneous with the world. I also find some of their designs to be pretty clever. So all in all, while not at the peak of children's entertainment or anything, it does deliver a damn good product with surprising nuance. Favorite character? Rabbit. He's so cute. Ah! Favorite episode? Scrapadactyls. Reason for original disqualification? Unexpected TBY7 rating.
Every 60 seconds in Africa, a minute passes. Together we can stop this.
You know when like you're watching a show and it's great and you're really enjoying it, and then for whatever reason the writers decide to lobotomize the entire cast to make a twist work? Well, that's basically the biggest problem with Supa Team 4, along with the transformation sequence, which I think radiates second-hand embarrassment. Nay, a little further, triple-hand embarrassment. Ugh. So, Miraculous Ladybug? But now it happens in Zambia, located in South Africa. I think that covers it. It's a group of friends that are recruited by an old lady to help combat supervillains in a secret team with superpowers, but there's a secret bad guy looking in the shadows. Then each villain appears like 17 times because they don't have budget to make new ones sometimes. And from that pessimistic description, you probably wouldn't expect me to have anything good to say about this show. But on the contrary, I think this show's art direction and characters actually spew charisma directly into your face. Like seriously, look at how they did the city of Lusaka. Of course the real life location looks nothing like it, but they took all of these recognizable African patterns and splashed them with buckets of paint like this is Double Up 2006. It's such a colorful show that shines even with the constant reuse of assets. They had a limit and used it as well as they could to great results. Though I had my fair share of problems learning the characters' names and sometimes understanding the dialogue. This is simply because they use names and words straight out the Nyanja tongue, and this extends to the characters' general voice work, whom all have thick accents kinda like me. I must admit I found it very awkward, same way I find Latinos in media from the US to sound strange when they randomly say unnatural words in another language. We're talking as if I suddenly empanada de atún interjected with random words the audience surely wouldn't understand. Not like what would actually naturally happen with people simply not translating a common phrase or being taken by surprise. I'm sure this does happen, don't get me wrong, the official language in Lusaka is English and I won't be surprised if the languages interjected into each other, but it does feel a little awkward when they try to force it into like a catchphrase or something. Outside of that, the voice work is actually phenomenal. I found myself really enjoying the mannerisms and accents of the characters because they genuinely feel natural. They seem like real teenagers simply through their performances, and that's a definite hit for me, as is honestly much of the stuff referencing the culture around the show because it feels like a celebration of it, unlike other shows that try to tackle other cultures only to make it into a lecture in safe stereotyping. Characters are a little strange to discuss because the former girls are tropey and the show's plot writing can feel uninteresting because of that. The first season almost feels like it chooses a girl, gives her a problem to solve, and then solves it by the end of the episode without ever coming back to it. There are plot elements here to be interested in, but generally they are easy to predict, and that's in part due to the uninteresting characters. You got the smart one, the hangry one, the sporty one, and the other one. It's not exactly a riveting lineup. I do like that the mayor is actually just straight up corrupt with no shame. Straight up, that was fun. Meanwhile, the real antagonists are pretty weak. Most of them kinda suck. They have stupid motives, and I repeated at least 3 times, but at least I don't have those complaints for Alligator, because I forgive them for him. As you know, if you watch the first video, there aren't that many Netflix characters that I find hot. But just look at this man. I want him to touch me in places, but he's canonically straight. God damn it, why? Why? Anyways, yeah, this show had a better grade until I got to the end. It was generally pretty good, and I'd recommend it if you like shows like Miraculous Ladybug or just find it interesting. Chances are you'll click with it until the last 5 episodes of Soar Season 2. And it's far smarter and cooler than other shows around the same venue in Netflix like Kitty Cats. The generic premise here is offset by the fun characters, writing, and art direction. Favorite character, Tamoe. Favorite episode, Brain Power. Shut up, Numa. Reason for original disqualification, laziness. I didn't know the show was rated Y7 until the 4th week of making the original video, and I just didn't want to append it. So, I must officially say the line now. You can skip to the next segment if you don't want to hear him, but it's spoiler time, and it only took 27 minutes. In 3, 2, 1... So, you go to the office of the richest man in town, see a known supervillain in the room across his office, with a mysterious green mineral being converted into energy, with a machine that's installed into the premises. And you don't make the connection, oh, the richest man in town whose claim to fame is restoring energy to the entire city is actually in cahoots with the evil people. How... What? Not only that, but the man himself has a severe brain rot takeover because he never asks once about the situation he's angry about. And then he kidnaps the characters and explains why he's so angry, with none of them going. By the way, their mouths are open, they can't speak. And none of them go, but you see, your mom was our partner in fighting supervillains, and one of those supervillains wiped her memory by manipulating the device I made and making it wipe her memory instead. No, you're not gonna say that. And then the one you established to be the smart girl, she sees 2 green minerals that glow and have energy restoring properties and just assumes they are a different thing because she's absolutely horny for the scholarship money she'll get from the rich guy, so she doesn't want the rich guy to be evil. Okay, fine, I kind of get that one a little. I would have taken a full scholar. My favorite part about this is the scene where they base it together, and it literally has the vibes of, guys, how did we not see this before? 2 + 2 is 4! I remind you, these are the characters that dedicated an entire 2-part episode to teaching one of their friends chemistry until eventually she got it. And she's the stupid character. The stupid character got the but you can't make the simple connection. And it's not like in Miraculous Ladybug, where at least you have the excuse of magic stuff happening so you couldn't recognize the masked people by their voice or build. Nah, here they just decide not to get it for the last 4 episodes, leading to the finale. And that was a small rant over the ending of this show, bringing the rest of it down. Let's fucking go. I hate everything. Let's collab. I'm tuned in. I'm tuned into this energy of hating everything and making that my entire personality. S.M.A.S.H, or S.M.A.S.H, or Saturday Morning All-Star Hits, is a live-action and animated series that parodies 90s Saturday morning cartoons. It's presented as a recording of the original broadcast of the show, from the bombastic expression of the host, the stupid catchphrases like "sassy sass," down to the interruptions by the news to discuss murders at the time children would be watching. This show is half a parody and half a critique of the TV of that era. There's a specific mini-animated show where you see adult men kill children, and they go, it's okay because your blood is in red so they aren't human. It's a pretty fun meta commentary. I also love how this framing allows them to discuss death, nepotism, and fame through the shows rather than with straight dialogue. It's really clever how they do a whole episode about an awareness campaign surrounding the dangers of the phrase "shut up," and then have that be the episode with the most mentions of "shut up," to critique how 90s PSS would often bring the issue to the kids' attention, and it's all delivered under the guise of parody. So I find much of this show clever, but I also feel like it has all of these elements to do nothing with. You can take out a lot from it, but it doesn't give you a lot. There was potential in the format to present something interesting in the terms of an overarching plotline, but it simply shows you some events about being corrupted by fame and ends. I kind of was hoping that the tapes would somehow point to something, telling the audience who took the tapes and why. In the end, they do tell you why these tapes were taken and what they mean. In reality, it turns out that a kid notices something in the background that ends up helping an investigation for crimes, which in itself is commentary about how 90s would underestimate the intelligence of children, but it's nothing like what could have been with the concept. This could have been a really interesting mystery, and it's all with, oh, it's just some kid, which kind of lame, and I'm sorry for spoiling it, but whatever. You see this fallout between the hosts in the show, who are brothers, but one of them is randomly doing much better than the other, and I was expecting some kind of too many cooks twist, as if these tapes were proof for something more grandiose, but as it turns out, they are just random. A similar logic applies to animated segments, where I like everything they have to say, but only one of the shows really feels like it gets anywhere. There's Reddy the Dinosaur, which is this random dinosaur guy who is just going off to college, and it's this really interesting exploration of a character having a young adult's crisis, having a really mature coming-of-age story regarding relationships and purpose, but then the show just stopped showing up, and it didn't really get anywhere. Heck, new shows with less to say start taking its place, like Pro Bros, where the two main characters are voiced by E-list celebrities. And can you believe celebrity casting is still going on? Can you stop hiring Jack Black and Chris Pratt for things? Please! Now, to be precise, I don't hate this. I think many 90s cartoons have similar issues where they didn't really have a purpose, whether that was because the writers at the time thought kids wouldn't understand or care, or simply realized that the issues with the format that streaming has remedied wouldn't let them do much of anything. So even if it's not my favorite decision, it makes all the sense in the world to leave M unfinished or without going anywhere. But it doesn't stop me from wondering if it all could have been more. I focused a lot earlier on the live action segments because, unlike the cartoons, those have no reason to not lead into anything, and I completely think that a potential second season should drink more from Adult Swim or Devolver satire on 90s culture. I still would tell analytic audiences to watch it. I'm sure the detail and writing could click with you to some degree. Favorite character? Trevor. Favorite episode? Save the Wait, no, that's from the lackluster animated 2022 show. It's actually Tape 2 Lost. Reason for original disqualification? It's a live-action animated hybrid, which means it isn't exactly qualified as an animated original. There's this other Netflix original show called Lost Dolly, which I watched as well, and I'm not including it here due to the similar reason, even though most of the show is CG and thus technically animated. I didn't watch that show for this video, by the way. I just thought the cute protagonist bunny was looking cute, so I watched it.
But to answer that, we need to talk about parallel universes.
Oh boy, I gotta admit, I excluded Voltron out of the original video out of sheer laziness. I just didn't want to watch a 60 episode show and found that the excluded criteria was a great excuse. But then this show missing really stood out considering I put She-Ra in the same video and it is a top 10 because they're very similar shows in concept and design. That was wrong of me, and so I've come today to make things right. Kinda. The show is still in 47th place, which is almost the very middle of the list, and I'm glad I skipped it in the original because it wasn't anything special. In fact, my main critique before watching remains true after. Though I never felt like the writing of the show was pointless, it's insanely evident that they intended to tell a shorter story and didn't plan much of the content past season 2, with some great hits such as the end of season 7, which is a change of pace where the characters mount the resistance for a single planet, and a successful one I feel. There's also some misses, like seasons 3 to 6 having a lot of stuff that just blends together and is unnotable. Essentially, I feel like this show is too long for its own good. So, 4 trainees at a space exploration program while faffing around end up finding 5 super ships hidden within their camp that look like lions. These ships are far more advanced than the technology of Earth, selecting their own pilots, which ultimately results in them and a teacher hitting the lion's call to defend the universe from a tyrant by letting the science combine into a super powerful robot called Voltron. These 4 trainees, their teacher, and 2 extraterrestrials that remain from the culture that built the lions comprise the cast. And I love their dynamic together, the most fun part of the show. The 7 of them all have unique personalities that naturally work with each other, and thus the episodes focus on simply adventuring to space and helping the people they find happen to be extremely fun. There's this random episode that is a literal filler where they are whisked away to a magical game show. This is as blatant as filler gets, and even that is fun because the cast seems easy to ride around. It's a blast and also charming. Some characters like Keith and Lance have a pretty rewarding arc, while some others still manage to be entertaining even through the messiness, such as Shiro's, where the writers were so afraid to make his homosexuality show, so they just made his partner look like a casual roommate he just so happens to fuck. Around season 3, Lothar is introduced as an antagonist and they clearly didn't know what they wanted to do with him or how evil they wanted him to be, so they take 90 turns with his characterization in a comically awkward way that ends up feeling rather disappointing. The action is very mecha anime for the most part. There's 4 types of battles in the show, and leading a resistance is the type that is always peak, where you see the characters get over their differences and find a strategy that can allow them to liberate planets, with a culminating fight in season 7 that's genuinely some of the best the show has to offer, at least for me. Some fans hate it. The strategic nature of these combats are always fun and thought-provoking, even when the stakes feel rather fake in almost every situation, considering the main characters are obviously winning if there's another 6 seasons of the show to go through. The other fight types vary in quality, with some great hand-to-hand combat scenes during seasons 3 and 4, which display the absolute heights of this show's animation power. That contrasts a lot with the general vibe of fleet fights, another type of fight that is pretty lackluster, it's just ships exploding, but the worst of the fight types are the Voltron fights. It's generally just Voltron getting their asses kicked until someone has an idea and then kills the enemy in one move, adding to that feeling of the characters never really being in any danger. They'll figure it out come minute 21 of the episode. Essentially, I'm saying that this show is really inconsistent. Sometimes the charm and awesomeness it displays is noteworthy, and sometimes it's lazy and cheap because it doesn't even know what it wants to do. And when that happens, the show is straight up not a good watch. I couldn't enjoy it. You can notice the writers bending around themselves to deliver or arrive at certain plot points with no regard to sense or logic. While season 7 has the best of the show, it also has 6 episodes of the character drifting through space as if they really just wanted to make a movie and slapped another 6 episodes of random adventures just to get there. That's the kind of expectancy of this show, which is just kind of a shame because it could work so well if they wanted to. And then, that whole thing culminates in this show's horrible ending. I've seen people throw crap at this show a lot, and watching it, I found myself unamused at the stretched middle portion of the show that many fans enjoy the most. I hate being bored by shows as that's a pretty good indicator of me not finding enjoyment in any of its qualities, and Voltron kept me on board through those few moments that live up to something awesome, but that still keeps the middle portion, which is mostly half seasons, as a stain in the overall show to me. But I think there's a reason why fans who watched it came out feeling less of this way, and it comes down to the mediocre last season and genuinely awful ending. If you watch the show, it's pointless for me to point out why it makes no sense in detail. It feels forced and some characters make 180 turns into different personalities. The final fight itself suffers from these issues I mentioned regarding Voltron fights, so it's easy for the ending alone to make the mid parts of the story seem more impressive. I won't even get into spoiler territory because you don't need me to explain it, it's blatant. The same way they didn't know where to take the story past season 2, they just kinda fell on the way to an ending, which really shows how the problems with this series land mostly on the lack of planning and unnecessary stretching, leading to a show that is frankly a bag of mixed nuts. Everything tastes different, kinda like it sometimes, and then you feel like you've had too much and will get fat near the end. On an unrelated note, is it me or do these episode titles sometimes sound like they really want to bring up a 6th lion out of nowhere? Favorite character? Pidge. Lens was almost there, but they bring his arc together by giving the man permanent drama, which doesn't sit nice with me. I just wish they had redesigned Pidge at some point. Her appearance is meant to be a cover-up for something she gets over during the first season, and then she sticks with this look for the rest of the show. Kind of a missed opportunity, but most characters could have used a redesign somewhere in the run. Favorite episode? I don't remember. Once again, too long. Probably the Black Paladins, maybe Collection and Extraction. I also like Reunion. It's really hard for me to tell in which episode the elements I really liked were in because it's all so messy. Reason for original disqualification? It's an anime reboot, but also laziness, yeah.
No thanks.
Oh, I insist.
Secrets of Elvendale. So this girl goes to like another world where she has cool elf friends with elemental powers. One day her sister sneaks with her into that world, only to find some obviously bad guy pretending to be a good guy is trying to take a portal to the human world so he can sacrifice it to revive his mother. I would say spoiler warning about that, but like, do you plan on watching this? One of my biggest complaints towards this show is just the boring art style. It doesn't inspire anything. What can I even say about this animation and designs when they look like this? I've seen more interesting white blob characters on Twitter than anything this is trying to do. Also, not that the antagonist has a sympathetic motive, which is bullshit. Now, thankfully, that's about the biggest issues. While I'm not going to claim this is filled with particularly good storytelling, it's not bad at all. It also doesn't try anything bold or impressive. It's magical elves who are going on an adventure and they sometimes will get grumpy with one another while not taking anything too seriously because the writers know they aren't any good at tackling these issues gracefully. And honestly, I quite like a show that isn't pretentious in the slightest, even if the writers like pretending like the audience is a little too stupid to understand because they're in theory young, said the 22-year-old who's watched 100 Netflix animated shows. The world building, as an example, since this is a fantasy setting, you'd expect some level of world building, but it appears the writers thought it could be too complicated for some viewers, so the most you get will be some character blurting out exposition. And the world is simple enough that you don't really care for more elegant attempts at exposition. The world feels like the setting of a Barbie movie, where it's just there for the pretty visuals to carry the adventure along, but it doesn't have any interesting elements to really fumble, let alone explore. I guess I can commend the character of Sophie. While she's the annoying brat, much of her annoyance is directed towards the antagonist and she's really not stupid, so everything feels right even if I see it annoying certain audiences in turn. Also, she's not always not stupid, she has moments of stupidity. I just wish there were more interesting characters overall. All the girls are girly and I kinda wish they would have had some variety. What about... Okay. I have a great idea here. It's like the head of a girl, and it's coming out of a toilet. Favorite character, the goblins. They're cute as heck. Favorite episode, the worst prisoner ever. Reason for original disqualification, this show has nothing to do with LEGO visually or execution wise. Maybe they do build stuff, but that's already stretching it. Yet this show still has this giant LEGO branding on its title, and I can't help but wonder why. It's definitely the worst LEGO show I've seen by leagues behind Monkey Kid and Ninjago. Either way, that means I missed this one in the original, unjustifiably so. For today, I'll take the L. Give me that shit. It's mine now.
This is the Bible.
You question the words of the mighty Jimmy? No.
Zack Snyder isn't exactly a director I hold in high regard. I'd go as far as to say his popularity is beyond me, given that he has a tendency to spam the same moves, yet still somehow gets a completely different reaction each time. And his Netflix show Twilight of the Gods is no exceptions. I mean, pointless sex, violence, emotionally flat characters, and random allusions to Jesus Christ where he doesn't belong. The only thing that's different from his standard stuff is the forced end of season cliffhanger, which was totally added due to demand from Netflix. So this woman named Sigrid is actually a short giant. So she meets a man, and on the day of their wedding, Thor comes down and kills all of the other giants because he's just an asshole. Vowing revenge, she allies herself with Loki, god of deception, to make a team of fighters to go on off Thor. This show is surprisingly not terrible. It's just a lot of the bad aspects of Rebel Moon, but simply due to being based on pre-existing mythology and animated, a few characters have some depth and interesting writing, and the amount of slow motion shots is almost no because animation isn't the medium to do that, which was one of my initial questions about this show before watching it. Essentially, at least some of the Snyder issues aren't present in this show, which was a neat surprise. However, I don't want to only focus on the Snyder aspect, as I imagine most reviews out there will focus on this, or on the fact that the antagonist is Thor. I can dig the idea of a story where the typically good gods are the antagonist, but I'm not so much of a fan if you just use the name and powers of Thor without actually using any of the more vague elements of the myth to bring depth to those enemies. They are simply bad guys with power. It's easy to compare this Thor to God of War's Thor for me, who comes in because you may have whooped his kid's ass, has a similar story to the protagonist, and ultimately those similarities tie up his arc for the game in a thematically logical conclusion. I will note this show has not a lot of overarching themes. This Thor, first off, kills the giants for a reason, which is strange considering he's supposed to be a racist asshole towards them without justification, and then he has absolutely no development at all. Others point out his psychology, but the most notable of those events is someone calling his penis a lust limb, like they search funny nicknames for a penis online. The issue is not really seen in the protagonists though. The biggest thing I can say about them is that they lack some serious emotional depth, and not because they aren't explored. There's a whole episode where they go in turns telling their backstory, but because they only display emotion selectively. If it's for the benefit of the scene's impact, they clearly don't want you thinking about the weakness of these characters, so the only time they show emotion is so as to try and elicit an emotion of empathy from the viewer. They react very unnaturally and so don't feel human. All four, Sid, Kona, and Thera have elements that makes me want to like them, but the writing surrounding them elicits nothing. I will say though, that the relationship between Sigrid and Leaf does wonders for their characters, because there's some genuine development there, which can get you attached. They dedicate the time to show Leaf's dedication to Sigrid and the guilt she feels in turn for shoving that burden on him, which I find to be great writing actually. I guess Loki and Egil also have interesting stuff in development, which is why I found them in the middle of the road. Loki's backstory gets explored kinda with a cheap ass dream past dimension, but it doesn't actually get explored. I simply wish they didn't blur out exactly what makes his philosophy, because they believe the audience can't understand for some reason. But then if we get to the plot, things start falling apart. Characters doing things for no reason, bunch of events meant to make you think, wow, that's so cool if you're 14, and a specific event to force the end cliffhanger, which makes no sense considering I think that happens like 5 minutes before. Though I think they did explain it, they just didn't focus on it at all because they were too busy having the characters be flat as fuck. There's definitely many random twists shoved everywhere, and it's really all a set piece to get into the next piece of the story they want to tell. And thankfully, that's a lot of fights. The other times it's very disappointing Zack that's trying to be sexy, but you can't beat one of them Twitter indies. If there's one thing I feel that this show never missed in, it's gotta be the animation. It's like a Tartakovsky style, but you miss the parts that make it good. But it is pretty unfluid. There's a big fight with a giant dragon in there that I found actually pretty fun and interesting. Plus the last 2 episodes are non-stop fighting, where it all looks great. If the art style interests you, definitely give it a go. It's not the most inspired or personality filled, but it is looking good. So, back to the Snyder thing, I think I can say this is one of his best. And I chalk that up to the fact that a co-writer was involved to push the stylings of Snyder into the writing elements. The random Jesus imagery has a point, but it still suffers from the strange and boring phasing, as well as resorting to the bread and butter following a large group without enough time to explore them. All things considered though, you don't have to turn off your brain to watch it, just make sure not to pay too much attention, you might get, like, notice things. Favorite character, Leaf. Favorite episode, The Scapegoat God. Reason for a reach, this just came out last week, give me a break! Look at this Viking helmet I have, I'm sure this doesn't offend anyone who's into Norse mythology. Stop the music. Hello my animalist moderators. Please explain to me how Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is not in the site because lip sync is made for English and literally no other reason, but exception, made for a Western audience where original Western voice acting is included in your database of people who could see a Pixar film and say the CG is bad because anime fans actually don't understand what makes 3D animation good or bad. Oh, the creator being Japanese? Then where is Blue Eye Samurai? Also created by a Japanese person, huh? Because of your stupid fault and inconsistent guidelines, I look up at Exception and I thought, my, this must be an anime, when that was actually completely wrong, you absolute brain-rotted fucks! It's almost like you're purposely excluding stuff because you believe it has a chance to score well in the database. Interesting. And now the best anime according to you all is Frieren, the show where a 1,500-year-old lady only knows the selective spells that would be convenient for the plot, and it's all justified by being completely unspecific and vague about any of the magic system's functionality because any rule would require the writer to think of anything that isn't just shoving things out of their ass and trying to make them feel emotionally unique. It's an 8 out of 10 show, but let's talk back to Exception, which is certainly not an 8 out of 10. It's worst. It's a sci-fi show story about 5 astronauts who agree to have their DNA replicated into clones aboard a shipment to analyze the living conditions of another planet. However, one of the last astronauts to be cloned is incorrectly done so and turns into a monster. What ensues is every moral dilemma under the sun of the other planet because like it has a different side and no humans and thus it's never had a moral dilemma. Yeah, shut up. Let's start with the anime. Hold on.
But it is clearly not. Just look at him.
That's Akechi from Persona 5! Let's start with the animation. The most often criticized aspect of the show for some good reasons and mostly bad reasons. I think the visual style and designs are incredible. They were a little stylized and unusual, but I kinda love how most of the cast came out particularly good, with a nice usage of color coding and shading on all of them. I mostly have gripes with the misprint Louis because his design turned out underwhelming. I understand they wanted a Beast from Beauty and the Beast scenario where he can be framed to be nice or scary depending on what the visuals need, but I'm not sure they did it justice. It's not terrifying as I feel it should be. Then again, much of the CG feels like that because the space doesn't feel as enclosed. They could have really played with this idea that the people are stuck on this spaceship with a giant monster, and they don't really go anywhere with that particular aspect of the design. The movement then is once again choppy. I think CG keeps doing without really understanding why it works when it does, but I think the people here understood generally. They had a few rules being off, such as moments where they use motion blur and choppiness at the same time to awful results. The real problem starts arising when it comes to the plot, because on the one hand it's trying to discuss morality, given the whole point of the concept involves the importance of life under the setting where you can literally just make a clone, and what it means for the clone to live or die. It works under the question, what right does a clone have to believe life is important, whether theirs or someone else's? The misprint isn't human, but he does have memories and can develop logic. Does that mean the characters can do anything about it? Are they even allowed to kill him considering their life is equally as replaceable since they aren't their original selves? Are they even really a being with a balanced sense of self? So the kind of questions that are really interesting, but because the characters work under these questions, there's an evident layer of separation between their actions and their logic. They'll act according to their morals as if they were rules, rather than something they can easily bend when the morality is the self versus the other, where humans, regardless of the morals, will choose the self by instinct. There's a little bit more to this, but give me a pause. These Mr. characters seem dumb or unaware. There's one of them that seems like a David Bowie ripoff, which really throws a wrench into what they intended to say, but at the same time, that does help the show feel more tightly knit. Your audience perspective is limited to this single situation, so it comes across as a plea to understand its morality rather than to explain it. Ultimately, that's a purposeful writing decision because the characters can only make one exception to their morals at some point or other, which is really powerful writing when you think about it. Even if these people follow their morals like rules, there are exceptions and they will all suffer from these, but it does also make the characters seem faker, less real. They only have one chance to make an exception because exceptions include one, and that's the name of the show and that's how you're gonna have to run it. Overall, it's a great show that got a lot of hate due to its shortcomings and the anime marketing. For a sci-fi show, it isn't the most thought-provoking. There's singular episodes of Love, Death and Robots that manage more. It tries to have horror elements, but they don't really work, in part because of the framing, so the watching experience is a little tense if you aren't as familiar with horror as it should be. Totally a show that meets analysis to truly enjoy because it has more to say than it initially appears, but it's morally presented as an open and shut case on occasion. Favorite character, misprint, favorite episode, gravitation, reason for original disqualification, being on my anime list made it seem like an anime. It's spoiler time with Nate and his live show! Hello, buddy! In 3, 2, 1... So I quite like the finale. I think it's a bittersweet ending, which is great. What isn't is the twist with Patty. And not because it doesn't make sense or anything like that, but rather because it feels like... It reminded me of this one Hispanic meme, where a guy shows up and he's like, "Hi, I'm good," and everyone's smiling, and then it's like, "I lied, I'm bad," and everyone gets sad. It's basically that. She doesn't act like she's hiding anything or has an additional agenda until it's time for the reveal, which is always the cheap way of doing a twist. I don't really love that. The worst way to do a twist is when you go like... I twisted my back. Can you call 911? The deal is, if she knew that they would be on the planet for 60 to 70 years, why did she try to bomb the entire operation? Worse yet, why did she plan on it right off the bat instead of using the resources they'd have to create a safe habitat for the alien creatures? At least try. Moreover, why does she attempt to save the life of the crewmates multiple times, only to drop that entirely for the twist to work? There's a point in the story where she could have just got on a escape pod and left with her clone to have all the hot, steamy lesbian sex they desired, but instead she saves them, knowing there is absolutely no chance they'll back off from the planet. The worst part is that she probably could have convinced several of them if she didn't flip the evil, sexy woman who I wouldn't mind getting stumped by switch, because she does have a point. The characters seem to believe that humans are faced with extinction, but they were also literally duplicated by a machine that can create immortality for the characters by duplicating either them or the biomaterial that is supposedly running out. This is a conquest mission, and she just didn't figure to tell them that? I don't know. It just feels like really strange that Patty's plan is silly at best and half-assed at worst. In an unrelated thing, why is Max so goth? Why did he paint his nails to go into cryosleep for decades? That's so camp, holy shit.
What the fuck? Is that Shadow's dick?
In the original video, I said something like this about Sonic Prime. Sonic fans are sure to love it, while the rest of you, I'd say wait for the show to be completed and see what people say then. It has the makings of something amazing, and it just might deliver in due time. And now I say the very opposite and flip that statement. I'm not sure some Sonic fans would love it, while the rest of you are more likely because it's not a bad introduction to the franchise. It is somewhat bland and generic when it counts, so I'm unsure if it's ever going to deliver. See, when I made the first video, I had only watched the first season, which is the one that shows the most promise, as the later seasons start intertwining the character arcs, and that leads to most of them feeling unfinished or unfocused. But with that same knowledge of the later seasons, I can see that they bring the worlds together into an adventure-style final battle that is frankly incredible. I've also played Sonic Frontiers on stream since then, so you should join me. I stream almost every Tuesday, and I can definitely say now that 9 is my favorite character in this show, and possibly the one executed best, even if he suffers from a similar in-universe problem that the finished show has, which is the world feeling extremely limited. By the end of the plot, 9 has seen the entire Shadowverse and knows there is nothing else. This could have been used very well to explain his suicidal tendencies during the final battle, but instead he's just apparently negligent of the fact that he literally is picking the worst solution to his problems. I remind you that canonically Tales has like 300 IQ. You can't generate a new universe, so you have to pick one of the 5 with all the 6 people in it that are actually capable of thought and not just random Mobian 42. And you as the audience sort of get the same sense. Like, the show reduced the complexity of the universe to a chamber of what the show wanted to achieve, which instead of resulting in a more centralized plot, resulted in people shipping Sonic and Shadow further. The worlds and characters feel lifeless and the bare minimum, something that any Sonic fan knows has become a bigger problem with Sonic storytelling. They need to decide on what the status of the world is, and their complete avoidance of answering such a basic question is which leads me to believe that it's normal for fans to be divided on it as they are. Do you like the elements of the show? Yes or no? Because there is literally all you're going to get. Exactly like 9's dilemma. I have wondered how much Sega purposefully made this, and if it's really a parallel between 9 and the current Sonic consumer, because we as the people who buy Sonic and are fans of Sonic want more of this franchise, and they're just not willing to give it to us. Maybe this is Sega's way of telling us to just conform because this is all we're going to get and we have no other choice. I guess the one thing we do got is autism according to that one video. Still, having a more complete picture of the show lets me rank it better. Knuckles' variation absolutely bore me and it feels like a shadow of the former character. Rouge still gets absolutely zero focus or respect, but at least Sonic's personality came around a lot more neatly past the first season of happy-go-luckiness. Though, in the end, he remains off and I still would have preferred if Shadow just beat him up and called him gay. And that's it, I really just wanted to talk about Sonic again because I like the franchise, sue me.
Legalize nuclear bombs.
Oh, it's that one show I talked about earlier. Have you ever played the hit dark comedy card game Exploding Kittens and thought to yourself, yeah, I hope Netflix makes an animated show about this, because I'm not sure anyone in the history of ever did. Caught me surprised when the result wasn't bad at all. This show follows God, like the God, who is sent to Earth to become more sympathetic with humans, and he's supposed to help a random family's unmeant prayer to return to heaven, the only catch being that he is now a cat with only the selective powers necessary for the selective jokes the comedians in the writing team want to make, when they aren't making pop culture references, because my God, not the cat god, there are many of them. Actually, the worst part of the show. Anyways, turns out Hell gets its CEO and does the same thing. So now there's two deities with power in the same neighborhood, and they are both trapped as cats, which turns out to be actually a funny setup for comedy. I found myself constantly laughing and enjoying this, even if some of the comedy spawns from general internet jokes. This show knows how to make crass and dark humor, because even if it's talking about something disgusting, they'll leave the joke where it's funny and not take it somewhere stupid like many other adult animated shows try to. And a similar logic applies to their ridiculousness, where they'll keep tabs on the surreal situation to make sure it stays whimsical and doesn't pass into the embarrassing territory so many other shows with paranormal plots trying to imitate regular show do. The show shines most when it focuses on the God Cat and Devil Cat duo, because there is a family they live with who all get some form of development and can be admittedly pretty funny, but they don't stand a chance with the main duo whose chemistry is engaging. I definitely like the family parts, which are reminiscent of Close Enough, which is a little higher on the list, and the overarching plot, for all of its simplicities, manages to feel interesting between the main duo's relationship and the busy pop like Heaven and Hell companies. Finally, the animation. What we're all here for apparently, or at least I hope like 20,000 of you. As a transition from the style of the card game, it works exquisitely. It's bouncy, it's clean, they made tons of assets so that like the riggers never feel cheap or repetitive, but it's still relatively flat to look at, with little to no dynamic angles and considerable amount of shot reverse shot dialogue storyboarding. At the very least, the few action scenes do try to push it and be creative, so it's not always bad, but the cleanness kinda transitions to the overall show. It's not the most innovative or new thing ever, it simply does what it does well, though I'd expect the comedy will feel a little cliche to some. Favorite character, Devil Cat. Favorite episode, Shane and Chuggers. Reason for original disqualification, check your dates, Boko. 2024 release. My name is Nate, no middle name Ire. I live at 308 Avenida del Arroyo Negro, Mexico City, Mexico, 87104. This is my confession. If you're watching this tape, I'm probably dead. Murdered by Wakfu fans who were right all along. In the original video, I threw shade at the fact that this was not a Netflix original. I still think that, but the fact that a whole season of the show isn't even on Netflix is a dead giveaway now. However, same logic as I had with Voltron. Why did this one get excluded, but not Close Enough, which was also a Netflix original momentarily? And the worst part of it all is that Wakfu actually kinda slaps. It's just that first season on Gobbledark that really turned me off from the show, but honestly, I'm glad I decided to push through that harder for this video. And not to say everything past that point is the best, it has many moments where it interacts with no plot progression and falls back into those problems that make me quit, but I believe it's worth it for those times the show actually gets serious. So it's a show based on an MMO game about this kid that can open portals by using Wakfu, which is the life energy of all things, and he goes on a journey with a few companions to stop a bunch of different people that change each season who want to make use of Wakfu for some pretty silly stuff, like ending the world or like having a light snack because they're really hungry. Trust me, it makes sense in context. Each season really feels like a different show, in the sense that Season 1 is similar to The Last Airbender, with the sillier moments and more laid-back plot that ramps up along with the stakes as the season goes on. Season 2 feels like One Piece, where the characters are traveling to different places as they approach their destination, occasionally fighting a few enemies and ending in a massive battlefield combination against an enemy with larger numbers and huge power. Season 3 feels like Dragon Ball, in the sense that it focuses a lot on the fights, the power level is notable, yet not as notable as the fact that Adamai decided to become hot for some reason, and I still can't pinpoint what Season 4 is like because I have no encyclopedic knowledge of anime since I'm not a weeb and I have like at least a little self-respect. So I'm happy to blue ball you all on that one. And it kinda does suck when the show takes an unfocused approach and they're just going on adventures. It also has the typical issues with the antagonists always having to one-up each other in terms of power. Season 2 has a character ascend to the status of God to fight a demigod who is only the secondary antagonist, and you're supposed to introduce a stronger guy next season. It gets a little off the rails into an area that feels pretty uncomfortable, yet at the same time they still manage to make every fight feel unique and interesting, particularly the final fights reminiscent of the best stuff in One Piece or Kingdom Hearts, which also happen to be eye candy. The show's animation is weird. I expected stuff past season 1 to look better considering the 5 to 15 years of difference, but in actuality they drop any of the fancy effects in season 2 and have pretty standardized good animation until season 4, where the animation improves once again. That's not to say it's bad, it's still really good to look at, but you can tell Netflix was not giving the show enough budget, since the 2 best animated seasons are the ones not created under Netflix. I think it just misses those crazy 3D effects they use in the original show to genuinely make you wonder if the characters are in 3D or not. It's an effect I really enjoyed watching, but they sort of dropped it in favor of the Flash/hand-drawn hybrid that most notable Flash animated shows end up using. Honestly, it's not the end of the world because each season still keeps the writing and pacing at that perfect point that can be exciting and chill-inducing when it's like a big scene and not just them randomly going around. Characters are expertly written except for a few small things in season 3. One that's meant to show how strong the new antagonist could be, a very awkward ship that's a little forced and very concerning due to the framing, and another one that's just funny underwear humor, I guess. But besides those 3 moments, I definitely felt like the arcs and development of everyone was superb. This redhead called Tristapan or Parsadal or Dali beat them all for me during the first few seasons. This guy was convincingly my favorite since like episode 20 of the first season, and he just kept it going. For a brutishly strong character, it's awesome to see the focus of his arc be those roadblocks that disallow him from using his truest potential. It's just that evolve each season into a different form, and this is what makes this show great for me. It manages to capture the essence of people change and people don't change both. A character whose arc during season 1 is feeling guilt for something menial keeps having guilt, now for something way more terrible during the 4th season, and this theme is even represented through the character's visual looks and nature as a species. I like that every antagonist has pretty defined motives. They are all definitely a highlight of the show. It's just hard to talk about them without spoiling them, so I'll just leave it at wow. This show is a fantasy, so it has many known human species. In fact, none of the characters in the main cast are humans, but I can't deny that despite this, the world building showcase in the show is pretty meh. Definitely closer to an anime fantasy where things are a little more fuzzy and there is no map or rules applied to the shape of the world. I don't think it truly matters, but that's definitely one aspect of the fantasy show that's not perfect. At this, half of the classes of the game aren't at all represented, so it feels like a pretty selective window, and sometimes I see stuff that I assume is related to the game, such as characters being knocked out mostly when they left a crater. Is this a visual thing from the game, or just a random decision by the team? That kind of stuff. It's a little confusing, and it does take you a little bit out of the experience, but I suspect fans are like pretty cool with it. In the end, that's all besides the point, because this show genuinely blew me away at moments. It's just a shame that it also bored me to sleep just as often, so at moments. Favorite character, Lady Echo. Favorite episode, Ruby Lags. Reason for original disqualification, not a true Netflix original, but also cause I'm an asshole. Once again, I'm sorry to all the Wakfu fans, I was way off the mark, though your show could be, like, shortened a lot. That doesn't mean I'm not about to go on another spoiler rant, so in 3, then 2, then 1... It's a big show, so let's go in order. Gobble, kill it. We don't like it. I don't know why there's 2 whole filler Gobble arcs, and although the second one is better, I did actually sigh through most of it. It's so pointless because they literally just snooze until the show decides step 1, which is really fake and I can't even keep up like in being engaged. I feel like the second arc is only better because the end of it stops being about a match and becomes a real fight, but really, the first arc never needed 3 episodes for such a pointless arc. It's the low point of the show for me by far. I had heard lots of buzz around Nox's backstory, people calling him the best antagonist, but I ended up liking Kilby more. Even if the second Kilby shows up, I pointed at the screen and said, gee, I sure hope this guy doesn't turn out to be evil. I feel like Nox wasn't that great because he's just a guy who is sad because his family died and wants to go back. The framing of how they show this is really clever, but the actual substance is not as easy to grasp. Meanwhile, Kilby gets like a redemption arc during season 4 and the best fight of the show when Yugo is fucking planets up just to style on him. That fight reminded me of Kingdom Hearts a lot. It made me get all excited and stuff, and yet I still feel like the Parcel versus Rubilax fight in season 1 had a much more strength because the stakes were whether Parcel could finally beat that barrier that had stopped him throughout in this season, rather than a life and death scenario. You don't know if he'll actually do it or if he'll simply cheese the fight and fail to learn the lesson. I think that's very clever. Pretending to kill him, on the other hand, incredibly lame. You know I have my gripes with not killing characters when you kill them if you watch my original video, but damn did they choose this specifically because they wanted him back for the second season after the post-nut clarity came around. Talking about him, the second season definitely dilly-dallied, eh? I'll see myself out. I found myself pretty indifferent of Oropo, but I definitely think his side bae is the best character. She's sort of self-contained to this season, and I think that ended up wonderfully. There's a complexity to her simple character, and an extremely emotional backbone and burden that she has to endure, but it ultimately being a burden she wanted to carry makes her an extremely stubborn character, with a simple act that speaks miles of her nature. Regularly, I pick my favorite character from logic, but I found her storyline compelling enough to say she's my favorite, or at least one of, plus her dialogue goes fucking hard. Season 4 has that scene with the Electro mother set to Twin Shadows by Canon, which and our soul, my dearest Besides that, it made me think that seasons 2 and 3 were clearly shackled from doing unique things like this because of Netflix. It's a wonderful scene and it's one of many highlights in season 4. I just wish Netflix had really given this show what it deserved, because it clearly didn't, and it just leaves a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth. They still did something incredible with that shit. I'm hanging around for season 5, definitely. I'd like to know more about the Arpagon and Ruel storyline, since Ruel is the only arc that hasn't come together really. I feel like the character is around too much for how much development he gets, but that's pretending he isn't naturally stubborn, and thus it's expected for him to be slow on that uptake and change. And finally, I miss my ass. Bring him back! You know what? I'll let you clip that out of context, but only that one!
Ethan, we've been trying to wake you up for 5 years, Ethan.
It's not Carlos, it's Carlo. And it's one of the worst advertising campaigns Netflix has ever done. What are these promotional images? The show gives off the energy of something like 12 Forever with an obnoxious protagonist, but that's completely wrong. This is a show about adulthood, bad memories, growing up, and fucking authoritarianism. And I don't mean growing up as in coming of age, but rather as one of the most unique discussions I've ever seen about replaced childhood experiences and the perception of adulthood and childhood from the perspective of each other, to the extent that would dare call this show the opposite. This series is a not coming of age story. It's actually It poses the question, what if you never grew up, and what if you grew up too fast? At once. It's presented in this psychedelic and colorful style that I love, taking a lot from Chowder or Flapjack, which are shows I really enjoy, and to call this Natecore, that would be an understatement. I am the guy who enjoys bright colors, and this show certainly looks bright. It's one of the most unique looking things I've ever watched. So, Carlo and Berto live in an island of dreams, where everyone is a toddler trying to appease and appeal to their parent figure, who is a mountain that decides who is a good kid and who isn't. The kids are dependent on the mountain, even if the mountain is a terrible parent. One day, Carlo and Berto wander into the Forest of Forgetfulness, a place where people forget you if you wander deep. And so, Carlo falls into a deep sleep for 20 years, and when he wakes up, the world is completely different. Now, instead of a kindergarten, it's an adult dystopia where people can legally forget their painful memories and childhood, which doubles as a message about forgetting facets of life that were enjoyable during childhood. So, essentially, you've got a kid running around a world where everyone was never a kid, except the king, Bloss, who is essentially a kid in a king's position because the higher council selected him to be king. This is basically saying that immaturity is a high privilege, but it also shows the contrast between being childish like Carlo and being ignorant like Bloss, who by the way has a great theme. And on the matter of similar discussions, the character of Tatiana, who basically neglected to grow up but didn't have a childhood, it's another facet of the discussion that goes fucking places as the story develops, but it's spoilers, so I don't want to tell you. This is old stuff that's developed in episode 1 and 2. That's how jam-packed this show is thematically, and the general framing of everything, which is much better than what I'm doing, keeps it from ever getting overwhelming. To say this is an achievement is an understatement. Also, you know that childish protagonist in Carlo who you'd naturally expect to be annoying? Yeah, he's actually endearing and funny because he isn't bothersome to the plural characters. When he dances, they don't rely on cringe pop culture, so they get across the part of making TikToks that's actually fun. This show references a lot of pop culture in extremely subtle ways. Not a single reference to anything is in your face, which makes it fit so much better than in any other show I've seen with these elements. Like, okay, FNAF fans, pay attention.
But that's not actually what I'm doing in reality, is it? Right, Patusho?
Did you hear that? That's the fucking hallway audience. Also, Burroughg hits you with one of these at some point. That's FNAF and JoJo, two of my favorite things. And they aren't cringy because they made them in a way where only fans of those franchises would notice. My brother, he watched this show too, he did not notice either of these references because he's not a fan of either of those shows. I've only discussed half of the main cast. I still have to talk about the actual show's writing, but the themes are so interconnected with the world and character arcs that I feel everything I've said doesn't scratch the surface. Every episode at least has something to say about childhood, adulthood, and its relationship to the broader system, such as an episode where an illegal radio station hijacks the airwaves to play punk music that shits on Bloss, only for Bloss to gleefully sing it as well. This is all commentary on how people conform to non-conformists, thus making their point moot. Along with those per episode commentaries, the show also packs an overall commentary that has you wondering how much of the show is actually real. The show has Carlo falling asleep every 20 minutes to start and end the episode, which by the way are accompanied with these incredibly animated custom intro sequences, and they play with the idea of falling asleep to make you wonder how much of this is a dream, which works exceptionally well if you get it figured out. They even introduce actual dream mechanics into the story, complicated but explaining things further. But that's the thing, the show is so complex that I feel it starts grinding on the convoluted. If your brain isn't the type to analyze media, you'll figure everything is senseless because it is simply too much. It has metaphors about metaphors, for fuck's sake. Like, forgetting people is a metaphor for growing up and forgetting what you used to enjoy, but that in itself is a metaphor about the difficulty of relationships and our natural inclination to not think about painful memories. Let me tell you, that's just a lot. I love it, and I'm sure many of my viewers probably would, but I can't ensure everyone will love it. Again, it's heavy. Let's go down to the more normal production aspects now. I wanna applaud the soundtrack. I still look for it periodically because it's so good, between the actual songs used in the show that exist diegetically, the songs within the show soundtrack, and every credit team composed of extremely intricate and awesome bossa music. How is this show so underrated? If it's not directly because Netflix didn't market it at all. I guess they figured it wouldn't have an appeal to audiences, but it still managed to be one of the best things on Netflix, one that I think deserves a second season, joining Bee and Puppycat in that club of spectacular shows that need a second season even if they aren't made for everyone. It's 13 episodes long, one of the most unique things I've seen. The comedy, which I didn't even discuss, is funny consistently. This year is one of the best pieces of psychedelic media ever made, and it's fucking gross that Netflix neglected to market it at all, to the point where I can't even find clips of it online. This is my obscure recommendation for this video. Please go watch it. I am not joking when I say it is fantastic and incredible, and it gives me chills just talking about it. That's how good it is. In the original video, many of you let me know that Ninjago Dragons Racing was based on a film and not on a show, which is a minor difference, but you guys sure let me know about it 17 different times. Honestly, thank you for that. I like being corrected. But 17 times is a little overkill and it hurts me in my pride. So that's why you're not getting it here either, even if I did watch at least Dragons Racing. You're gonna have to convince me? Oh, I love the Wii! Why didn't you say so? Okay, let's cover this idiot. Yes, I swapped them at the start of the segment. Ninjago Dragon Racing is a soft reboot of the original Ninjago show, which was based on a toy line, and it follows different logo people who take up the mantle of Ninjago due to the fact that they can control the elements, and now they must learn a ninja technique called Spinjitzu, which JoJo's Bizarre Adventure totally ripped off. This soft reboot focuses on new characters after all of the worlds from the original have coalesced into one, with the characters from the parent show now following in the steps of their teacher and becoming the TGEs. In reality, and this is the weakest part of the show, they're just quickly explaining the broad strokes of their role in the original and continuing their arcs with no problems and whatnot. The new characters end up feeling like support during the big fights because of this. Like, they are comparatively weaker, so it makes little sense to make them be stronger than their teachers, and that does create a little bit of a disconnect, but in general it's silly enough that you don't really mind. It's got that Lego silly, like the one you'd see in the games, which is always pretty charming. Of the new characters, 2 are really strong, and 1 is still not quite ready to have his moment to shine, with his arc being purposefully stuck, and that's Arin. Sora in Wildlife, no, that's Sora, the other one. She's actually a perfect showcase of what this show does perfectly, because her backstory is absolutely tragic and her development is outstanding. Even if the nuance of those developments isn't the deepest, their execution is damn near perfect, with absolutely all of the elements it would need, because this show is not afraid to play it straight. They never get leaked, but if something bad happened to a character, they'll show it, straight up. Wildfire is extremely fun. She's a very brash and loud character, but that doesn't stop her from constantly being hilarious. The comedy writing of the show is already hilarious, but she just takes it to another level. And then you got Arin, first guy to teach himself Spinjitzu, and he can't do it. It's one of those situations where he's extremely talented, but his technique is bad. Being self-taught, he's learned a lot of bad habits, and ironing those out is being really tough for the character. So when he actually does Spinjitzu, he does it badly, and they focus so much on that Burroughg comes off as pathetic. Kind of a shame, but I expect this is to be intentional, and when it actually has a payoff, it will be really good. The animation itself isn't anything crazy, but can we appreciate the extreme care to make the characters seem like plastic figures all the time? The shading is on point, and that really makes the show a constant treat to look at. I remember a younger version of me avoiding the original show because the CG looked pretty bad, but they completely stepped it up for this one. In reality, the show doesn't push any boundaries. It's not particularly innovative, but its honesty, charm, and most importantly execution is at least making the event seem exceptional. Clearly another example of doing what others are doing greatly and doing it much better than them. What I am always surprised by is seeing the fans say this is bad compared to the original, because if this is bad and still placing highly on the Netflix list, what sort of sorcery was the original doing? My bet is that it's just nostalgia, but I am curious now. Favorite character, Wildfire. Favorite episode, I Will Be the Danger. Reason for original disqualification, still based on a pre-existing franchise. It's not a show, it's not a film, but it is a toy line, and I guess we are just letting it pass into the club because there was a lot of demand for it. I may surprise many of you, but actually this was the second most requested, not the first, and it's obvious why the first was requested more, come on.
Under many universes, Battle Kitty is not number 17 on this list, because this show is probably one of the most childish shows I've ever seen. But holy shit did they turn it whimsical within a few episodes. Fuck that guy. But holy shit did they turn it whimsical within a few episodes, until this is now one of my favorite shows that reminds me constantly about one of my favorite games of all time, Miitopia. So you follow Kitty, you wouldn't believe what they are if I told you, and their pal Orc, who is, wait, I think I made a similar joke to this last video, at least the character named Sasa isn't actually a weed, but that's okay. They literally don't need drugs in this show to get high. All of the people go to Battle Island, which is basically this dangerous gauntlet of adventures and enemies that lock away a legendary monster, with whoever beats that monster deep within the island becoming the champion! Kitty will fight using some crazy battle moves, and there's a large focus on the power bows their partner Orcs knits for them, which, as described, give them power-ups. Yes, Kitty say gender. The thing about Battle Kitty is that it's interactive, but also that it's not actually interactive. All you really do is select the episodes you want to watch from the world map, which is not the most comfortable to navigate, but it is incredibly charming with all of these extra animations and sound effects reminiscent of video games, which is an important element to the show's overarching vibe, down to including fake loading screens to introduce areas visited by the cast. You can generally select which episodes you'd like to watch in a set by choosing a location and checking the different lengthed episodes in each area. Usually there's a long episode, an optional half episode, and a 1-minute gag as a reward for watching the optional episode. This basically means the show is way longer than you'd anticipate if it simply existed, and the structure of the episodes allows for simple gags to be done comfortably. Moreover, you need to watch all 3 episodes in each part of the island if you wish to proceed to the next group of episodes, which allows the writers to pace the story and reveal information and character arcs in a sensible way. This would naturally be very difficult, but the writers stare directly into your soul and proceed to deliver execution that isn't just good, it's excellent, with every character getting development and relationships with one another throughout and still working despite the interactiveness of the episodes. I cannot say the word interactiveness of the episodes. For example, Sasa, the rival character, has a partner named Merchant, and during this one episode where Merchant and Orc have to work together in a protagonist role, they develop a pretty evident bond of friendship and respect. This bond is not emphasized in the other 2 episodes of the part, so that you don't get confused, but during the next part, multiple episodes bring it up as its obligatory information, making it pretty clear for the audience that this show is willing to give as much as you're willing to watch. This show takes a bit to take off. The 2 dead giveaways are how repetitive the comedy is during the first part, as well as Kitty's very voice acting. They are voiced by Matt Leisel, who actually does half of the show's voice acting alone, including the 2 main leads, even though I didn't even realize in watching. But that does mean he takes a moment to get into that particular role, because it's pretty unique. So at first he doesn't sound like an energetic and overconfident Kitty, but rather like someone trying to do their best impression of 2003's Pinocchio, and not the one by Disney or the one by Guillermo del Toro. But the biggest giveaway is just the sheer amount of jokes that rely on being funny because they go on for too long. An issue the writers took note of and reduced greatly by the time you're in the second part of the island, along with the butt humor that is generally overused, and that one doesn't stop happening. And it's once these issues are ironed out a little that the show truly becomes one of the silliest and most charming pieces of animation in Netflix, with a bombastic energy that invites you to join along with the silliness, an absurdist approach that is naturally interwoven into the writing, like dark comedy for general audiences, and one of the best soundtracks for an animated series, bursting with personality and charm. Hey, all Miitopia fans who follow me from me videos and are being spoken to directly right now, this show is going to be your shit. Go watch it. This here's what I mean when I say we shouldn't have this many makeup options. And that's
positive energy is what invites you so efficiently. Without feeling tacky, they achieve the feeling of characters who you'd like to be friends with. You really get to admire their approach and acceptance of others in a way that no other show makes you feel, because these characters are themselves to their fullest expression, and it makes you happy to see that. It's like a group of furries in full fursuit offering you commissions in the middle of the street. You'll come out strong, but I have just developed instant admiration for your bravery, and also the fact that you'll draw me very good. This is a direct plea to send me fan art on Twitter. Talking about art, this show's animation is great despite its simplicity. The animators are constantly playing with the framing and models in ways most shows won't venture, and since everything is already so silly, it doesn't seem out of place and more like a nod to animation in cartoons and video games. They really made a malleable Play-Doh of a show, and people who claim to understand brain rot need to take notes. That comes at a price. First off, the plot twist at the end, while being a little predictable, generally pays off, since it's properly teased and brought up as the show happens. It also ends on a huge cliffhanger that, while not critical in the sense that the show finishes the arcs it sets up, there's totally further directions in which the show may not end up going due to low viewership. I love how the season 2 teaser is basically a reward for watching every single other episode, but it's gonna make you really wonder how season 2 would work. Second off, there's a lot of LGBTQ themes. The main critique for the show online seems to be the non-heteronormative representations. Personally, I enjoy them and found them super sweet, but it's definitely one of the most blatant LGBT shows for younger audiences on Netflix. I still feel they simplify a lot more than some other shows like Dead End Paranormal Park, where they get into the issues specifically experienced by queer people. So, if you're one of those parents, I say look into it, because this may actually be a pretty nice approach towards gay characters in children's shows. Holy, these reviews are getting long at this rate, but I think I've sung enough praises about this show. I'm doing the kitty walk and leaving. Kitty walk, we're doing the kitty. Favorite character, Sasa. Favorite episode, Neon Cove. Reason for original disqualification, its interactive nature. I felt like it didn't line up with the rest, but the interactive elements are so minimal that it does make me very sad to think the original video won't include it. I guess it will be in the very future 20-hour video I make in 2032, where I compile all of these videos into one after Netflix closes.
Open the country. Stop having it be closed, said the United States.
Self-racism. Self-racism was not in my Netflix bingo card ever, and yet here comes the new top 10 show, Blue Eye Samurai, tackling self-racism. When I made the original video, here it comes again, this show had just came out. It was fresh and it was new, and I decided to watch Carol at the End of the World instead. To this very moment, I regret that decision, because I much would have preferred seeing this over that, even if both shows share a very similar issue in the ending having a less than stellar payoff so they can set up a potential second season. Blue Eye Samurai is one of the best shows in Netflix, and I probably decided to make this extra video because of it alone. And even then, I don't know exactly what I'll discuss or write about. I'd be perfectly fine with putting out an abstract idea of how much I like the show and calling it a day. Something like... But let's do a little more, because this show may not be the most thematically dense or unique, but it does have an entire episode of sheer brilliance, arcs that can only exist under its setting, and beautiful stylized animation. The action in this show is just spectacular throughout. The framing and rhythm of it all is amazing, and there's probably one of the most direct standouts of this show. Even if you can't get into the story and characters, whom I will discuss in a moment, this should at least carry the show alone. The storyboarding and choreography of action scenes is spectacular and so absolutely clean, easily surpassing most action media, and actually utilizing the advantage of animations with it. The deal is, if you look past the surface level awesomeness within much of the show, you are at absolutely clean episode writing, where the values of the characters, besides being well written, are so absolutely exclusive and told perfectly within the story. So, what did I mean by self-racism? Well, the main character, Misu, is a complete minority in the Idhn Japan setting. He's a Japanese and European mix, which naturally ostracizes him from the rest of Japan, where he's considered to be a demon, and thus he makes that decision to find and kill any foreign in Japan that might be his father. It's a simple revenge story in the surface, but layers of that revenge start appearing throughout the story, where you see both sides of the character's culture affect his motives and actions. Along the way, he'll become followed by a disabled cook with no hands, and chased by a samurai who has been dishonored after losing a duel against Misu shortly after his engagement to a high-status lady. The cool thing about these characters is that they all hate something about themselves to a fundamental level that affects their decision making, and not just because that part of themselves is inconvenient, but because society has instilled hatred for people with those traits. They hate themselves through osmosis. They show perfectly in episode 5 of the show, which is arguably one of the best episodes of television, and I'm not joking. It splits itself between 3 stories that all have a similar progression, and it runs them all in parallel to show their similarities and differences in a bold but efficient manner. Not a single of these plotlines is wasted, recounting and showing why a character became and is how they are elegantly, and it's all tied to their very nature as a person. I'm gonna talk more about this in the spoiler segment, but for now, at least I should let you know this episode is a masterpiece. The quality of character arcs displayed only in that middle portion episode is almost representative of the entire shows. Although the protagonist is the highest in by a landslide, everyone else changes towards their separate goals with each episode, making them awesome. I don't think there's a single weak link in the show's cast, simply weaker links that naturally have less relevant parts in the story. Even the big antagonist, whom I must admit is pretty inconsistent, manages to be great through his morals and attitude, even if he's only threatening through hearsay. And all of this is a very convoluted way to say that I'm disappointed in myself for missing such a spectacular watch in the first video. Part of me wishes to say more, but I think anyone who hasn't seen this show will find the very thing says more itself than I ever could. Please go watch it. It is the new top 10 in the list, number 10. Displacing Love, Death and Robots. Favorite character, Akemi. Favorite episode, The Tale of the Ronin and the Bride. Not saying this one is like saying humans don't breathe oxygen. Reason for original disqualification, don't remind me, I'll cry for the following 6 minutes of the video. So, to those who watched it, you get to see the good part. Let me clarify on my criticisms with a spoiler segment in 3, 2, 1... Yes, I did say he was referring to Misu before because it's a spoiler. I don't know how, since I caught it within like Misu's introduction due to the Asian girl who is a tomboy pretending to be a guy trope being so common, I guess. But like, come on, the boys gives it away evidently. Hey, talking about Asian tomboys, what the heck is wrong with Mikio? This is not a serious question. Bro fumbled that one so bad because he felt a little emasculated. Lamau, what a fucking clown. There's guys out here who trade some shit for a woman like that, including me. Okay, back to serious analysis. Every character hates, but they are to different extents, and have different interpretations on how and why to destroy them to different degrees. Ringo has internalized the hatred and neglect he gets because he has no hands, but doesn't want to blame those around him because in the end, they are both human. And by the end of one of these episodes, he comes to terms with that hate and decides to focus his energy on improving like the absolute Chad he is. Daigen wants to kill one person he finds dishonorable to redeem his own honor, only to find that person is a woman and thus would still be dishonorable to kill her. But in the end, he comes to terms with social dishonor and realizes honor is born from within. Finally realizing, hey, I can't fight with Mitsu on a level ground because in the end of the day, honor is not what society says, it is what I want it to be. Akemi is my favorite and I put her in my Tomodachi Collection Island. She hates Indecent Woman, but most importantly also the limits and platitudes of other royals and wishes to kill them from the inside through manipulation and psychology. Something she does learn a little too quickly for my own good. Like the first time she's in a room with a man and she just like fantasizes him into nodding. But in the end, she manages to understand where to make a change in order to allow herself freedom rather than control, since that's what she was looking for, you know, the visuals were a little bit on the cheek. I also love that her arc never humbled her, even if she's a spoiled child. Rejecting Taiyan at the end, also showing how she got over her disdain for women after understanding that they too can be great. Which leaves a really interesting arc for the yet unreleased second season, where we could see her trying to reach greatness without being humble to horrible results. Also, that whole thing trying to reach greatness thing is echoed in Ringo's arc if you didn't remember. Perhaps Ringo is instead too humble and thus we'll see them grow in contrast to each other going forward. Either way, my internet is picked. My interest is peaked. My internet too, but my internet is the peaked one. And then there's Misu. Damn, does she hate everything about herself and externalizes it through her revenge. A revenge which is revealed to be pointless in the middle of the season, and yet she still tries to get it done because that's how she's trying to express her self-hatred under the excuses that those other people are at fault. Meanwhile, her womanhood is hated and repressed due to the bad experience we see in episode 5, and it's a matter that emphasizes the width of her hatred. The world forced her to be strong like a man through its happenstance and the nature of her birth as a mixed race. But acting and showing these strong traits of her personality is exactly what leads to the most traumatic event in her life, and we as the audience get the privilege of observing all of those vulnerable moments of her life and will. It's genuinely such a well-interwoven piece of character writing, and I'm outstanding that I could somewhat like fit it in one page of a Word document. I want to shout out Madame Kaiji, awesome quotes, but also just a fantastic part of the season whom I didn't call my favorite due to the relevancy and the monstrosity of other characters written here. Kaiji constantly shows the strength of values that accept and work within her less than stellar situation to provide a better life for those around her. A great example of a character that already figured out how to fight in the world she's in rather than against the world she's in, unlike any other prevalent character in the show that learned it as the show goes up. I want to be clear that I don't find the ending to be that well written, and that's sort of what I meant in regards to the big bad aka Fowler. The final battle against him feels rather silly because the man just seems protected by the same plot armor that's protecting Misu, making the fight very unappealing, and the actual show ending is a little unsatisfying. Hopefully what it sets up has an even better payoff in the next season, but I'm not a fan of the writing decisions here. It feels like the character arc for Akemi was more satisfying. Also, Falling himself fights Misu once, and the other tell of his power is just him cutting a plant real good, which works to foreshadow, but doesn't really get him feeling threatening. More so when you consider Misu is out here cutting men in pieces with cooking utensils. Still, these critiques I can look past because they are rather minimal, and I mostly notice them from carefully dissecting the characters for this. Except for Fowler, his issues are pretty clear. That scene in the church really makes his character, and I wish we get to see more in the next season. And I hope we get to see the next season, because wow, this show is lovely. While the first video was a success, it didn't reach the heights I needed it to achieve, so I'd really appreciate if you shared both of these. I firmly believe that the first video deserves a lot more views based on what similar videos achieve, and it would literally help me keep running this channel. Videos like the ones I've been making this past year take a lot of time, and I would love to not need to take time away from those videos on another job. Please, my channel is in your hands. As for Arlo, I refuse. Unless both videos together get 1 million views, then I'll dedicate a whole video to explain why I don't want to watch it. That is my terms.